Is exercise always healthy and is more better? Well, today we'll discuss the relationship between exercise in general, but also different sports specifically, and their association with mortality, morbidity, and exercise-induced pathologies. So if you're a runner, a cyclist, this podcast is for you. Now, my name is Rob.
And I'm Stephan. We are two biological data scientists passionate about using science and tech to become our best selves. And this is already episode 16 of the Fit for Science podcast, where the two of us discuss wearables, quantified self, data, and how we apply those things to our own life. But before we start off with today's topics, I have to address the marathon in the room. This Sunday is the Vienna City Marathon. It's a huge event in the city of Vienna, where we are both located right now. But last week, you already did your own personal marathon. And the cool thing is, this might be a bit of a spoiler for your own channel or a teaser. It depends how we want to frame it and how much you want to share. But in the beginning of the year, in one of our podcasts where we talked about reflections, but also looking forward, you said one of your goals of this year would be to run a marathon. And you really said you didn't care if it's an official marathon or you just wanted to basically do it. And now you did it. Please tell us more about this. I know some details, but I don't know all of them yet because I wanted to discuss on air.
So the reason was both for myself, but also to test some devices. So it was plural. There was officially first the plan I would do the Paris Marathon, but for reasons that didn't work out. But I anyway had the training schedule planned. So I was like, okay, then on that day, I'll just run it myself. And specifically, I ran the exact same perfectly straight route 10 times, like 5 times back, five times forth, which was quite boring. And the day before, I went cycling for 4 hours or something, like not sports cycling, but still on like a too small bike. And my quads were already hurting that day. And then the next day, I was just dying. So I had to really push myself to get sub 4, and I just barely made it.
But you made it sub 4, just to say you ran below 4 hours, a full marathon of 42.1 whatever kilometers.
I mean, that was also the thing. I wanted to test the distance estimates of these watches. Yeah. And I'd sort of seen that 10 times that distance would be a little bit more. So when all the watches had at least 200 meters more than the marathon, I stopped. And later I looked at what marathon times they all said, and they all said below 4 hours. So the worst estimate at least also had me below 4 hours. I don't actually know how it works normally with a marathon, how they exactly calculate what the distance is. Do they use the middle of the track? Do they assume you take the perfect lines? Mm-hmm. Like this makes a difference in the end.
It does.
So I just used what it tracked. It was a relatively easy task, but I used 4 smartwatches in my right hand, 4 in my left hand, both the same brands, all top of the line models. Different models, like on the left, the Garmin Forerunner 570 set the maximum GPS accuracy, on the right, the 970, and then Polar Vantage V3 and Grid X2 Pro, and like for 2 more brands, so Coros and Sunto. And it was quite interesting. They, in the end, were like within 500, 400 meters of each other. But if you look at the tracks, like I made a sort of live video I aligned them temporally and spatially to the best fit, and then plotted them, and you see some are really jumping a lot more in their GPS tracking than others.
Okay.
So yeah, it was interesting, and I was surprised I saw bigger differences than I thought.
Okay, and just logistically, can you explain to me, you said you stopped only when all the 8 watches, it was in total 8 watches, right? 4 left, 4 right? Yeah. When all of them basically recorded and said, hey, you finished the marathon distance plus 200 meters, just to be safe, right?
Yes,
how did you know?
I sort of saw already which ones were recording the least, and then at the end I checked these 2 brands.
Okay.
I mean, it was roughly 200 meters that I knew. I just knew I was over it. And
after 4 hours of running at a quite decent pace, because you ran 42 kilometers, right? Mm-hmm. This is quite intense. Then checking all the time 8 screens, it's kind of, for me, I would be overwhelmed.
I mainly checked 2 screens, the ones that I saw so far that were recording the least. So I only in the end was checking Coros and Garmin, because these were doing sort of the lowest distance.
Yeah.
And then I just, at the end, just checked Coros, and I knew if this is over the line, all of them are over the line.
And how did you ensure that you didn't click any buttons? Because, I mean, for the video watchers, I mean, this is now one of the first advantages in watching the podcast, I guess. You built this kind of ring of
Yeah, so
4 watches
basically
each, right?
2 watches are always connected with there are 4 watches and they are connected to each other's holes and
Buckles,
buckles,
right?
whatever. Um, and I sort of made them together in a very in a very ergonomically okay way where I can either slide it up my arm for a bit if I need to do something and otherwise hold it in my hands.
If you want to eat, if you
Yeah,
need to
exactly.
drink.
So that was the most annoying part of the marathon, holding them the whole time. So I had 2 of these sets. And I was just like under prepared in some ways. Like I got pretty bad cramps and stuff. So I was just suffering and having to stop to knock out the cramps out of my legs. But I think it was fine in the end. It was just, I would not do it like this for fun because it just made the whole experience more annoying.
Yeah, obviously. But did you wear a Whoop as well and your O-ring?
Yes, I didn't track with the Aura, but at my Whoop, I also had a Amazfit and an extra Polar and a Huawei.
But this was all on fixed on your
exactly. These
arms.
were I was actually testing for heart rate, but not pressing buttons. Some of them you can actually lock the screen.
Okay, that's smart.
I one time for I think 5 seconds accidentally paused the Chorus. Yes, the Chorus Pace 4 I think, but I quickly fixed it again. And I think these 5 seconds I can somewhat correct for in terms of the distance traveled wasn't that big and I can easily add it up.
Okay, and final logistic question from the person who thinks through the process now for the first time. Obviously, you thought about it you thought about it well enough and prepared well enough to manage. And I think that's all that counts. But how did you do your fueling? If you said, you had cramps, but nevertheless you needed probably water. And I think the rough rule is if you have any endurance activity that is approximately more than 1.5 hours, then you usually depleted your glycogen in the muscles and also the liver to some degree. Hence, you cannot really have no access to glycogen anymore. And if you're not running in a metabolic state where you burn fat mainly, that would actually would be catastrophe. You would fall into a hole, what is sometimes called, right? And this 1.5 hours are a ballpark estimate as far as I understand from sports science. It's mostly what a given human has stored in terms of carbohydrates available in their muscle and liver. And obviously you ran for 4 hours, which is more than 1.5 hours. How did you do this? Because you did it alone, right?
Yes. I mean, at the end, somebody helped me because I forgot one of my water bottles. And I also wanted some video recording. So the last 10 kilometers I didn't run alone.
Okay.
But the first part I ran alone. So I had a running vest with some gels and I wanted to bring some water, but I forgot. But I parked my bike, so I cycled to where I wanted to run. Then I parked my bike at the start, and I would come there 5 times.
Okay. And then you had a feeding station basically there.
So on the back of the front of my bike, I had a bag with extra gels, some stroopwafels, which are like Dutch waffles.
Like these honey ones, or it's very
It's like something else in between there, but basically waffles with some form of honey in between, and 2 bottles of water with also some energy in there. So
like carbs.
yes.
Also electrolytes.
I think so, but I didn't really prepare well enough to know how much was in there. I just never had any issues before. Also, when I did a test 32K, I didn't get any cramps, no issues. I felt very good. So I was like, okay, I prepared even better than for that. I was like, just 10 kilometers more basically. But I didn't. Yes, but I think the exercise the day before was just not smart.
Okay. And you went there with bike and went back with a bike home. Wow, you're a beast.
Well, I think I'm still nowhere near what many people do, but I'm also more of a cyclist. So running is just like an extra thing. But yes, but that actually leads us to the main topic of today's episode. Exactly. What is that about?
Yeah, so congrats again. Good job. I hope you're happy about the result. It's definitely cool. And if you're not happy, I mean, you basically fulfilled your yearly goal in approximately the first quarter. So there are 3 more quarters and you can actually test. And if you're better or worse when it's getting hotter, I guess it's harder for you when it's getting hotter. But then, in Vienna, we have a cool fall. So then you can actually try again and see if there is a better performance. But yes, today's topic, we wanted to talk about the relationship of exercise in general, physical activities, different sports, and mortality. Mortality is always the word means dying. And morbidity means diseases or disease risk or so. And Eric Topol, a few weeks ago, posted an interesting paper that the title was Physical Activity Types, Variety and Mortality. Results from 2 prospective cohort studies. And the cool thing is they basically took 2 large cohorts where they had repeated physical activity assessments, and they had these 2 data sets and they pooled them and then had new results basically. So there were already 2 studies separately, and then they pooled them and had new results. And the cool thing is also that they have these repeated physical assessments over the course of 30 years, 30. And these assessments were, and this is a downside we will discuss a bit, but nevertheless it's really cool. It's every 2 years, but it was based on questionnaires. And as we know, self-reporting has its inherent limitations, as we have discussed before in the podcast, especially for nutrition science, but also exercise science is definitely suffering from that. And now we said for 30 years, so they started 1986. There you couldn't say, hey, just slap an Apple Watch on the person, right? There was no Apple Watch, there was no Garmin or so on. But just to finish off with the statistics, it's more than 111,000 participants, which is quite a large number. And in general, what the study did, they had these questionnaires, and for every entry, they then calculated the MET, the metabolic equivalent of task. And I have to admit, I've used this term before, also on the podcast even. It's in all the apps. Usually it's in the background what happens when you enter in any app. I did 10 minutes of running, and then they ask you, was it easy, medium, or hard? And they don't have really the actual data. Then in the background, what they pull is an MET formula, like a value for MET, and they just multiply it. And I never knew the exact definition, and that's why I looked it up. So to finish up with what the study is about, I will quickly try to explain the definition to you. I'm not sure if you have it down because you have done much more with wearables. Like you also don't have a super good understanding of it.
No, I've seen it. I've somewhat used it, but I never dug into how it's defined.
Okay, yeah. So it's to some degree loosely defined. So one MET, so metabolic equivalent of task, is the energy requirement or the effort of doing nothing, sitting still. And then each MET more is the factor. So if you have an activity that is 10 MET, that means you burn 10 times as much as if you would be doing nothing, which is already, wow, how do you quantify this, right? Where did they get the values from? And I think these METs come from multiple studies across the last 50 years from some metabolic chambers and so on. So you have to take them with a grain of salt. Nevertheless, it's better than nothing. And for example, if you now want to, and that's one of the results of this study, is that the best mortality risk reduction is with 20 MET hours per week. Now we have to kind of take this apart. So how do I get 20 MET hours per week? I could take a 10 MET activity that would be considered running at a speed of 10 minutes per mile for our US American listeners and 9.6 kilometers per hour, so roughly 10 kilometers per hour. That would be considered an activity that has 10 METs. And if I want to have 20 MET hours in a week, then in this week I would have to go for a run for 2 hours. And that would then give me these 20 MET in the activity of running specifically. Does that make sense?
What I don't fully get, so let's say you do a 2 MET activity. You would need to do it for 10 hours.
Yes.
But
then
that means you did 10 extra, like you would have gotten 1 MET at baseline. So you always did an activity that was twice as hard as baseline.
Sitting, right. Yeah.
But that means you got sort of 10 MET extra, if I see it like that in my head.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do 2 hours 20, you got 2 times 19 extra.
I see.
This in my head doesn't fully compute.
Okay, no, me neither. For me neither, but I understand what you mean. But usually this is just a factor. I think you could, like, it's then always hard to see if it's like this one times, this breaks stuff.
But 1 MET is not on top of, like if you say this activity was 1 MET, that would mean you were just sitting, or that is on top of, you would always calculate it as on top of.
No, I think it's basically sitting still.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's sitting still.
But okay,
But then again, you could do 200 hours of sitting still, would you then, also
Yeah.
200 MET hours? I don't think so. So that's where it breaks, probably.
Yeah. So we have to, it's a bit of a vague definition still. Why it's defined like this.
Exactly. It's vague where it's coming from. And also, again, if there are metabolic researchers, I think, out there, or experts or sports scientists that know better, please put it in the comment if we misunderstand it. But I think using the 1 MET is not nonsensical in a sense. It's not defined, right? It's like, when you have the globe and you say, I'm on the South Pole and I go south from there. That's not a well-defined thing because you cannot go south from the South Pole. And I think using the 1 MET in this sense doesn't work. It's just this baseline of multiplication that you say, okay, it only makes sense to use it in a something greater 1 sense for the activity assessment.
But these 20 METs indicate the best you should do, or the minimum?
No, this was the best association, or no, let's put it like that. After 20 weekly MET hours, the association or the increase in mortality risk leveled off. That means even if you do more, you can do more, you do not get more of a mortality risk. And that's interesting, I thought. So
reduction in mortality risk.
Exactly. Reduction in mortality risk. Very good. Thanks for pointing this out. The interesting part is they covered a lot of exercises, so we'll quickly ramble through them. Walking, jogging, running, bicycling, swimming, tennis, climbing, flights of stairs, rowing, calisthenics, weight training, resistance training, and some other racket sports. Squash or so. And the interesting, or one of the interesting aspects is that the only exercise that was not associated with a lower risk of death, so mortality, was swimming. and I could not really find out. They discuss it as well because they obviously cannot determine the causal link, but they say it's also very interesting that in all activities apart from swimming, more activity was associated with a lower body mass index and a baseline prevalence of hypertension. Or what it means is in the opposite direction, people who were swimming more actually had a higher BMI and had a prevalence for hypertension, like high blood pressure, which indicates to me, but maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, reverse causality. So often in cases, if people have some kind of limitation or already disease or are actually having high blood pressure, the doctor might not recommend them to go into the gym, especially 1986 or whatever when the study started. They would rather have indicated like go for swimming because it's a low impact sport and you kind of cannot hurt yourself doing it. That's my interpretation, and that's why this weird association is that we have much more people than, okay, if you swim more, you're actually more unhealthy. No, it's the other way around. More unhealthy people tend to swim more if you look at active people.
Plus, with self-reporting, who knows what swimming means? Maybe they had to fill it out, they felt bad, and they were like, oh, but I did swim, or was in the pool at least, for 5 hours with my child yesterday, so I swam for 5 hours.
Exactly, yeah. So, and exertion, self-reporting is a limitation that they note themselves as well. And then one more thing was they had a significant non-linear association with respiratory diseases, which for me also makes to some degree sense because obviously if I go swimming, I'm wet, I'm maybe exposed to, like, I'm colder, I have a suppressed immune system, and I got more infected. And thereby maybe more likely than I'm going for a run, for example, or walking, which is the absolute winner, which I was very happy to read.
So walking was the best in terms of decreasing mortality.
Exactly, yes. It was associated with the lowest risk of death at 17%. The reduction was 17%. And also it never then... it tapered off also, again, very, very fast. I think after 5 MET hours per week, basically, yes, if you go more, it's not really doing more in terms of mortality risk or hazard ratio reduction, but it also never increased. And that's the interesting second part, I would say. If we look at the plots, and we will provide in the show notes, again, the link to the paper, and I think also the link to the blog post. So at least this picture you can look at from Eric Topol, even if there's a paywall. In some instances, there was a it was always non-linear, the relationship first. And the second finding was that sometimes if you do it longer, it crossed basically the 1 in the hazard ratio. That means you lose this lowered risk of mortality.
So when you say non-linear, that means it's not like every 1 MET you do more, you get a reduction of 0.1. You actually see it drops and then it either stays the same, it goes up again, or it has some other weird shape.
Exactly, and exactly. And weird shape, I think, would be the best description. A lot of them were like going down and then going up again, or going down, up, and then flattening off towards the 1, basically, to have no effect. Because as soon as the confidence interval crosses this 1, it's not significant anymore. So we really don't know, because of the noise, the statistics, if it has a positive or negative association, or it basically means for some it has a positive and for some it has a negative one. Let's look at one more very important sports, which is cycling for you. So let's look at cycling. And interestingly, cycling was the worst in terms of lowering mortality risk. But there, I also was very curious because cycling is somewhat safe, like in a sense, or I felt that the sports itself is very isolated and you can do it, but then they did not differentiate in the questionnaire, or couldn't differentiate post hoc if it was commuting or recreational bicycling. And I think then if you just do it for the commute and not for fitness or recreational purposes, then it might happen that you have a higher accident risk, or it's or just 10 minutes downhill or something like that.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I actually think the commute might be in a way where people get the most benefit, because otherwise they're doing nothing and then they're commuting. And maybe I think here it's just so hard with all these things that the moment you get into higher numbers, like very sporty people, so many things confound. There are very few very sporty people who just do their one sport for their whole life.
Yeah, that's true.
Usually either they do multiple at the same time, or they switch, or they get a different interest. And I think many people run and bike now. So it's hard to say. And also, I don't know how they discriminated between the different age categories, as in what were the ages of people when they started recording this, and how did people, if you walking, for instance, would be all age categories, whereas if they started with some older people already, then maybe they still did tennis or squash because it's in the rich neighborhoods, the thing they do, whereas the not so rich people that are older will not be able to do this. I mean, there's so many confounding factors.
And also, climbing, for example. I mean, who in 1986 climbed regularly, and now it's a very sport that is quite common, I would say.
That's why here there's only climbing flights of stairs.
That's true, yes.
Where there are people who do this for 2 METs. Yeah. But here they also have a 0 MET, so it's on top. So the axis doesn't start at 1.
No, that's true. I think in terms of takeaways is it's a cool study. The final really big important thing before we kind of conclude what we can take away from this study is that if you adjust for the quantity, then actually variety was the biggest determinant of lowering your risk. So really cool what you just said, that nowadays we do a lot of things, especially this was normal people. It's more than 111,000 normal people. I think if you have a pro athlete who always cycled, they will cycle for their whole life, basically, or then they choose something that is adjacent to cycling, I don't know, rowing or something, or maybe running. But for normal people, really the variety then was also a 19% lower risk from all-cause deaths, basically, like mortality, which is really bringing us to the bottom line of the whole study, I think. In this case, I think it doesn't show that there is like too much sports hurts you. I would take away that variety is important, doing something is important, and especially doing the whole stretch from like walking is for me very low impact to what they call jogging is very slow running and fast running, but up to cycling, swimming, and so on. All of this is actually good for you, and the more you do it, in this case, from this study, I would say is healthy and reduces your mortality risk, as long as you, and that's number one, I always have as the exercise rule number one, avoid injury and accidents by all means. Like, don't ever do anything too risky in a sense because it does not pay off any injury that avoids that you can then later on do sports again is the worst outcome that you could fear, right? Or your model of there's so much to gain or so little to gain, but if you risk it, then you have so much to lose. And this I think we see here nicely represented.
I wonder if there are studies where they looked at accident, both short-term and long-term injuries and these kind of things for the different sports, and how many people, from dying to getting a 1 week injury, basically how often that happens and how severe these are. Because I can imagine cycling has a few really bad cases where people either fall off a cliff or get hit by a car, whereas running is more prone to people getting knee pain or hip pain or foot pain, which is much safer in biking. Like in cycling, I almost never got an injury in my life because of cycling, I think.
I mean, it's also when I had a knee injury and got even surgery, cycling was the rehabilitation activity.
But here I think it's a difficult balance because I also do a lot of indoor biking. I have this bike from Zwift, but this also gets boring for a lot of people. I'm still kind of okay with it, but I do enjoy the long outdoor rides more, even though if I did the same ride indoor, it would probably be slightly safer.
True.
And I have fallen with bikes before, just been lucky, or it hasn't really gone wrong.
So inside, even if you watch TV or a movie or so, it does not alleviate. Do you think it doesn't alleviate the boringness?
I mean, for me, it's okay as an extra, but I always do it for 45 minutes and then quite intense, like this 2 minutes on, 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off. Quite intense for 45 minutes or 40 minutes.
Wow.
And that in the end is like half an hour of on and some breaks in between, and that's okay. And then you also feel really tired, but the other rides, like from 2.5 to 6 hours, I wouldn't want to do on the indoor bike.
I mean, it's also a nice feature of being in nature or outside, at least having the sun, seeing the sky. I mean, this is all we know that.
And there are some health benefits.
Exactly. I mean, one big limitation obviously is the self-reporting, as we pointed out, and this is definitely the case of what we are about here: wearables and self-quantification in an automated way, and having devices, machines, or anything that will objectively measure something. And here I want to point out 2 more studies quite quickly. So even highly published, one of them, that was a few years ago, 2 years ago or 3 years ago in Nature Medicine. And what they tested is the association of wearable device measured vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity, what they call VILPA, like vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity, with mortality. So they again asked the question, people move more, how do people look? Imagine pooples. Anyway, if people move more in a vigorous fashion, so this is a very strict definition, what they call this VILPA, do they have a lower mortality? And I think this was to some degree published so highly because there was an objective measurement. It was the movement of wearables, so actigraphy, I think is the term, right? And what they found is also quite staggering numbers, but like I can just read here. So VILPA, if you have 3 length standardized bouts per day, then you have a reduction of up to 40% of all-cause mortality, and 4.4 minutes per day is associated with up to 30% reduction in all-cause mortality. So obviously this is a large paper, so they go through all the different morbidities as well, cancer, cardiovascular disease, but this is the take-home message, and then they validated an external cohort.
Interesting. I think here we should also be very aware that these things are then usually comparing against the worst of the worst situation you can be in, as in zero, doing 0 things, being very inactive, eating probably very unhealthily. I think it's very probably, if we were to go back to the 1960s, you would have you wouldn't be able to even do this cohort because there were so few sedentary people.
Yeah. So it's even called, it's non-exercisers. I don't know how exactly this is defined. We would have to look that up. 25,000 non-exercisers, a follow-up of 6.9 years only. So also, I mean, you don't know, but apparently enough to do statistics. And yes, as you point out, what they always do is they compare the lowest group to the highest group to get these large numbers. Obviously, they do all the comparisons, and that's in the paper, but what is reported in the abstract very often and then also reaches the headlines and gets distorted is these high numbers. So do I believe that if you move 4.4 minutes per day extremely vigorously, however they defined it, this is like, it had to be a certain intensity, and I'm sitting around or lying around the remaining, I don't know, 23 hours and 55 minutes and 20 seconds, I don't think I would have a 30% reduction in all-cause mortality. Not at all. I think we have a lot of implicit biases inside of this term. Because, for example, if I'm injured or I have a disease, a chronic disease, maybe I cannot even move with vigorous intensity, right? I cannot run up the stairs, because that was one of the takeaways for some people. Yes, just use every staircase as a sprint. This accumulates over your day into 4 minutes and you're good. And I'm like, yeah, but not everyone could do that, right? If you have an injury or one leg or whatever, then this doesn't work.
And this is also not what they studied.
Yeah.
You're extrapolating an average or whatever to make up an exercise routine that nobody really does.
Exactly. It's not the protocol that was
Yes.
assessed. Exactly right. It was really taking one number and then correlating it. Do I think it has no value? No, absolutely not. I think it made a very good case that you can do high impact research using wearables in a much better way. Like, you needed much fewer people. They required fewer years of follow-up, so not 30 years, only close to 7 years, and not 111,000 participants, but only 25,000, and so on. So I think this is a good case, and also they could validate it in a separate cohort of, again, the UK Biobank. So this is also, this relationship seems to be true, but the takeaway is, I think, often skewed or misconstructed or wrongly presented in the media. Do you agree?
I think so, yeah. And not even always the media, but sometimes even the PR from your university wants to put it out in a certain way.
That's
potentially.
True. Yeah, I mean, this also like they are struggling for funding and money, so they need the screen time or the online time, exactly. But I think there are the takeaways, and I'm always trying to provide a useful short takeaway, is that vigorous exercise is useful. So if you see an occasion and you can do it without injury or whatever, take it. Like, don't take the elevator, take the staircase, but don't think that only if you take the staircase and run it up 4 times a day that this is it. Like, you can do more, and more, again, in this case, is better, but we will see if this holds true.
Indeed. So is there one more study you wanted to discuss?
Yes, I try to make it extremely short because it goes directly into the vein. Again, and this was very recent, in October last year, there was in Nature Communications published, again, wearable-based, and there they also claimed something, or the media then claimed something quite extreme, and I'm highly critical of the takeaway, and I would want to adjust the takeaway, but I would really know what you were thinking. So what they tried to re-establish is that there is a formula from the literature that typically from self-reported research that equates 1 minute of vigorous activity to 2 minutes of moderate physical activity. And there are some definitions, what is vigorous, what is moderate, but basically that was the consensus before this publication. And now they said, hey, we use actually objective measurements compared to the self-reporting, and we actually find that, again, if we compare this lowest group to the highest group, and now I go to the most extreme claim that I think they make, if you go to low physical activity versus vigorous physical activity, 1 minute of physical activity is worth 53 minutes of 53 minutes of low physical activity, or 94 minutes of low physical activity when it comes to type 2 diabetes risk reduction. And I don't think that's true. I think this is just statistical, like, modeling, basically, that gives you this. But I don't think this is the takeaway, that you can do 1 minute of vigorous exercise instead of 1.5 hours to reduce your type 2 the disease risk, basically.
Yeah, here I really wonder what they corrected for, in the sense that these are very different categories of people that they are looking at. where there's definitely confounding with food, with wealth, and of course, probably it's some standard correction for socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
But I don't think it captures everything here.
Yeah. And it's really like all-cause mortality, like 1 minute to 53 minutes of low activity. I just don't believe. And also the bad thing in the sense of the takeaway, I think for many was, and also in the podcast sphere, that you can again do 1 minute, or then you multiply it up and you do 5 minutes, and then you have worth 5 hours of low activity. No, I don't think so. That will not work. And I think what people don't understand, what you're basically saying, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. What they did is now they did this association, and that's what's called substitution modeling. So you have some people do this and some people do the other, and then I compare the people. But what would actually give me this result is if I do the intervention on the same person and then test the outcome. Obviously, it's not possible. I cannot have two universes with the same person. The one lives like that, the other one lives like that. Who dies earlier? Not possible. But in some scenarios in science, this is often possible. And this would be the direct measurement of the outcome. But now we do substitutions. And substitutions have this inherent limitation that you basically pointed out immediately.
And here, even in a way, a better replacement would be you just tell random groups of people, you just do the vigorous, you just do the slow but long, exactly. And then we compare. But of course, you cannot influence people's lives like this, at least not more than 2 years or whatever is ethically valid according to whatever committee and whatever people are willing to do for a certain amount of money and how they adhere. If you can even get groups of people to do this, because if you were to be able to do this study, I think if you would only get a certain specific type of person to do this, and they would probably be already people who are quite kind of into doing a lot of sports, because it's hard to reduce somebody's sport amount. Exactly.
Telling them basically, hey, I want you to do less of something good. Yeah. That's tough. And also, even as you pointed out, is it ethical to take something clearly beneficial away from them? So I think, again, trying to have a more balanced takeaway. I mean, they always sound boring, but the takeaway is really total physical activity is the best predictor of reducing all-cause mortality and risk of all other diseases. So have, in total, a lot of activity. And then I think what these last two studies highlight is that vigorous exercise is more efficient. So you get more for your time spent, but light activity is absolutely not worthless. I think that's really the take-home message is that does not mean if you get a chance to take a walk, cycle to work, that you shouldn't do it. No, you definitely should, and it will improve your all-cause mortality risk.
And probably the multipliers that are mentioned in these studies are overstated, like the 10 times effect or 20 times, 50
90.
times, 90 times.
91.
It's very unlikely to be true if you do it as an intervention in somebody's life.
Exactly.
But what also requires not so much effort and maybe gives you one mat if you're listening to it and getting annoyed by something we say that isn't true, is subscribing, liking, and commenting on this video, and in general following us. Whatever platform you are on, it would be great if you like our podcast, if you could give us a follow, because that's the main way that other podcasting platforms actually get people to get this recommended to them, and more people can then find out about us. So would be really appreciated whether you're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. That's really the best way to support the podcast.
Yes, and we try to really have one topic nowadays, and we focus on the topic, and then you can discuss below, and we really like to hear from you if you like the format, if you like the topic, and then we can actually provide more of this direction. But we usually follow our interests and also to some degree our expertise, because we do not want to talk about stuff we have no idea about. But I think the bottom lines of the previous papers were do more, do higher variety, and if you can manage, it's very time efficient to do more vigorous stuff, so higher intensity. But is more always better, Rob?
Well, that's the question. But at least there was recently a study by, I think, the university I used to be at, the Radboud. I don't know if it was the Radboud Medical Center or the Radboud University, but I'm pretty sure it was one of the two. So I used to live in the Netherlands. And there they showed that if we already spoiled it a bit, probably overall, it's good to do a lot of exercise, and to a degree, more is better. But there are downsides, especially with very vigorous, intense activities. And the thing is, they mostly study this then in older athletes, because there, I guess, you can also sort of long-term follow them, and then you just become older as you follow them longer. And they call them, I'd never heard of this term, masters athletes.
I like it. How is it defined? Let's do definitions.
Let's say, so it's not a hard definition, but the way that the paper uses it, and I've also seen on other channels or like other platforms, is 35 years or older, which I'm apparently in that well, I'm a lot older already than 35, or significantly older. So I could be a master's athlete. Then the next definition is having a lot of training volume. So at least 300 minutes a week at a certain intensity, which I don't know if I fully get there. I guess if you count commuting, then maybe. But also that they are really like aiming to improve their fitness, have specific goals, and potentially these people also are focused on their health. But it's basically high level athletes, not necessarily professional, but very high performing athletes at high volumes over 35. And the definition is still a bit vague, but
so would you say someone who is 36 and strives for doing a marathon would definitely qualify to be in this category?
I think so, but it depends also a bit on how much they're training, I guess.
For the marathon, yes.
Yeah, I have we talked about how that I prepared a bit for the marathon, and I did it reasonably well with this app called Runna. So I had like a whole schedule. But I told you the other day that a friend of mine called Thomas, he just, I think a year ago or so, he was, I don't know what sport he was doing, but he was like, yeah, I want to try to run a marathon. He was running like a little bit, but not much. And he just went out and ran it in, I don't know, 3 hours, 40 minutes or something without bringing drinks or food with him. He was just out.
Insane.
And then he had to find some water at the end somewhere.
Yes.
That's like lack of preparation. And I think at the time he must have been in his early 30s, so he wasn't quite a master's athlete yet.
How did he, did he have any knee pain or ankle pain?
I don't think so.
Okay,
no.
wow. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, I don't think Thomas is listening, but if you're listening and I'm wrong, leave a comment about your exact preparation. Yes.
Shout out to Thomas and his great knees.
Exactly. But yeah, so they studied these master athletes, and basically they wanted to find out, is it in the end beneficial or not to do this, and are there downsides? And I think the sort of high level conclusion is, yes, it's generally better, but cardiovascularly there are some dangers. So with your heart and your arteries and veins, there is some potential risk, especially for these really active people. I do have to note here, we'll put the paper in the description. I don't know, do you have the titles here? Yeah. Masters athletes with abnormal cardiovascular findings, a clinical consensus statement of the European Association of Preventive Cardiology, of the ECS, and the American College of Cardiology. So a very catchy title. But basically what I took away from it also is that it's not just about, are there downsides to doing a lot of exercise? Because apparently there are some increased risks of cardiovascular diseases compared to doing a bit less. But what I took away from it is mostly that maybe doctors should be very much aware of how to treat these patients, and also to look for the signs of these things, and then knowing how to treat them, because usually doctors know how to deal with very unhealthy people. And then maybe if they see, oh, you ran a marathon yesterday and you did an Ironman a month ago, you have a bit of high blood pressure, but it should be fine. Also what they address in the paper, maybe even if you're very fit and you have high blood pressure, it's still worth it to take that medication, because there's still this long-term effect of the pressure in your body. And that this shouldn't be sort of explained away or cured, which it's of course not, by all the exercise that the person is doing. And they also mentioned that you should watch out a bit for sudden changes, that even if you're very fit and you drop to a level where other people are, that drop is very indicative that something might be wrong. So maybe you cannot exercise as much all of a sudden. And then even though you might still fall in the normal range, for you, that's very...
Which again speaks for baselines, tracking yourself, knowing exactly what to expect. And when you have like repeated outliers in a sense in your data, then you can know that something went wrong. I'm wondering, is it, if we do endurance sports now in this case, with these 300 minutes, it's probably more the endurance athlete that is addressed per week or more, like at least 300 minutes per week. We have adaptations to the cardiovascular system that we discussed before, right? The endothelium gets adapted, which is positive. Usually there's a reduction of blood pressure. You have an increase in heart performance. This goes hand in hand with a larger heart, a more muscular heart, a higher stroke volume that determines the VO2 max, and so on. We discussed all of this before, which is always framed as a positive adaptation to a stimulus followed by corresponding recovery. So we want to have super compensation by the system. But what you are now talking about, is this a side effect of something that is generally beneficial, for example, a larger heart, a reduced blood pressure, or is it then this kind of overuse of the hardware in a sense? Do you know what I mean? That I have so repeated high blood pressure during the exercise. So in general, I reduce my blood pressure because I have a more trained system. But obviously during exercise, I have high blood pressure. Hence, for example, I push more the LDL into the endothelium. Hence, I create more plaque. Right? Which is it, or is it both to some degree?
I think the blood pressure one is hard to say. I think probably, for instance, one of the examples they give is atrial fibrillation. So here they said masters athletes have a 2.5 to 4 times higher risk of developing atrial fibrillation compared to people who just sit still. So this is one of the things where apparently the heart is adjusting to do better pumping, more efficient pumping. It's bigger in a mostly good way, but apparently in some people that leads to AFib.
Maybe it's also more sensitive to the electrical current that it requires from the brain, and then leads to contraction. And maybe this increased sensitivity leads then to misfiring, and you get older. Basically, the wiring misfires, but you have a very sensitive heart. Hence, you have arterial fibrillation or something.
They do mention something about autonomic nervous system changes. So there could be some direction. Adaptation where it's just not functioning as it should. It's also, of course, we were not evolved to do these kind of extreme things. I'd always a bit dislike these comparisons, but nobody back in the day when we were hunter-gatherers would do this crazy kind of extreme exercise. So again, we're looking at something that we weren't really selected for surviving, or
no one back then wanted to burn a calorie in excess for a recreational activity. Basically, recreational activities were like leisure activities, but not something you said, I will run for 60 minutes now in circles. No, they had to run because they wanted to chase a mammoth or whatever. I think
there's actually, just a side note, I think it's Back to the Future or so, where there's this episode that they're in the Wild West and somebody is running and they don't understand why they would run for fun. They're like, you're not being chased by anything. Maybe it's a misquote, maybe it's another movie, but it sort of stuck with me that we are so used to when you see somebody running, you're just like, they're doing exercise. But exercise wasn't the thing until, solo jogging exercise until maybe the 1960s, 50s.
Exactly, yeah. It's like, I also can't recall the exact, but I recently listened to something where they also discussed this, that we nowadays see someone exercising in the wild and it's normal, but it wasn't normal already 70 years ago. So in 50s, 40s, this was not considered a normal thing. Or it was like, athletes do this. So a specific tiny group of the population, fraction of the population, but not the average Joe would or Jane would do this.
Yes.
What are other indications? Maybe one more that they talk about that clinicians should look out for and definitely not undertreat in these masters athletes.
I mean, I don't know about treatment, but you already mentioned plaque buildup. That there's actually a higher prevalence of coronary calcification and atherosclerosis compared to the less active peers. So something is happening there.
Interesting.
I don't think they go into a lot of detail, if I remember, but what I did note down here is that they do tend to be very stable plaques.
Mhm.
So what the risk of a plaque mostly is that either the whole plaque ruptures or it just also just closes down the
Obstructs,
whole
yeah.
thing. And this does, at least the rupture appears to be a less big risk there. So it's a very much more stable atherosclerosis. One thing I found interesting, I wanted to mention, I never heard about this, but there are, and I'm going to butcher this name, bradyarrhythmias. I hope that's how you pronounce it. And that also partially has to do with how slow the heart rate is. And basically how I understood it, if you know anything, then correct me, but normally you want to be able to adapt to, at high intensity, your heart rate would increase and then you settle down again. And then we would always say a resting heart rate of below 40 BPM is like good. Now you're like very fit. And when I see my Apple Watch telling me like, oh, warning, your heart rate was below 40, I was always like, why is it warning me for this? But apparently that has more to do with not being able to sort of regulate the heart rate in all different scenarios. And then for some people, this just leads to a very low heart rate because that regulation is off, instead of it being actually an adaptation and the heart is still pumping enough volume and is doing its correct thing. So this was also, so the need for, that's how they logged it, the need for a pacemaker. So having something that regulates the heart rate was up to close to 20% more frequent I think in this case, elite cross-country skiers.
Okay, wow. No, I wouldn't have guessed this. Yes, I mean, in general, what we always talk about when we're resting heart rate and what's the goal is to be as low as possible in a sense. I mean, the lowest heart rate per night is this dip that you always get reported in an aura, and that's when I've well recovered nights 43, 42, and you were below 40 even, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is usually a good sign. That means you are very efficient, right? This is the translation. I need fewer pumps to have my whole body gets all the nutrients and oxygen it requires, right? But I think in this case, at least to me, it sounds again like what you also described with the AFib, just the opposite, that something in the wiring and in the regulation of this, in this case, it's the parasympathicus or parasympathetic system that downregulates is maybe over-engaged and downregulates too much. And then it becomes, bradyarrhythmias, or what I usually refer to it as bradycardia and tachycardia. Tachycardia is a too high heart rate and bradycardia is too low heart rate. And both of them is a cardiologic pathology. But usually if you have a very low heart rate and the doctor is looking at you and then he asks you, are you a runner or a cyclist? And you say yes, they completely like write it off. And I think that's exactly what the paper you found and you brought is talking about, that maybe they should not just write it off, especially in older athletes, and they should treat accordingly. And I think the whole purpose of the paper is, it sounded to me, the title, very much like, hey, please put that into the guidelines of cardiology such that cardiologists are educated on this group that is a growing group. I would say there are more and more people who could be considered masters athletes because people are exercising more, which is on average, I think, a good thing.
Yes, for sure. And I think, again, to sort of take away from the paper, how I took it away is it's all good. You do want to exercise a lot. Yes, there are some risks with it, as there are risks with anything.
Yeah.
But almost always the benefits will outweigh those risks. But if you have an unexpected decline in your performance and you also feel a bit different, even though you might still be as fit as your colleague, you were a month or two ago a lot fitter, then maybe something is off. And also we should maybe take medication if we have high cholesterol, high blood pressure. Maybe it's, even though you're trying to do everything without medication, it's still not sort of a bad thing to do it on top. It doesn't make you a worse person, or it doesn't mean you're not doing enough. Maybe just genetically or during your childhood or something influenced it in such a way that you need this.
Exactly. And it still improves your quality of life, your outcomes, your all-cause mortality, and you should not feel any stigma around it being then classified as before the healthy person, the fit person, then the sick person who gets medication. Rather see it as the medication enabling you to do longer what you want to do and being safer for yourself and everyone around you.
And cardiologists would need to be better informed about the athlete.
Okay. And so you would argue for checking, if you're such an athlete, having a cardiologist first and having then one that is maybe educated in this risk group. Basically.
Yes, or if you're for some reason wanting to get checkups, then check that your doctor would be somewhat familiar with this if you have the opportunity to choose your doctor.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I mean, this is really cool and I think very important. Let me try to summarize and you will supplement in. So I think we started off with basically any physical activity is good. All of them reduce mortality apart from swimming. In one study, we discussed the limitations. I would still say, although the study doesn't say this, swimming is healthy. Do you agree?
Yes. I think most exercise is healthy and relatively the most of the things we do are low risk enough that it's healthy to do.
Yes. And I think one more takeaway was definitely there that variety also, simply the variety apart from the total amount reduces all-cause mortality a lot. Just a call out here a little bit. Don't necessarily join the most trendy and new group fitness that has a lot of blows and whistle exercise, because there has been shown a lot of accidents actually that lead then to injury that prohibit you from doing exercise. So maybe not go to the craziest new class that someone invented where a lot of weight is thrown around in random ways. But then we moved on to 2 studies that actually used wearables compared to the one before that did it with questionnaires. And there they focused very much on high intensity, because I think that's very easy to quantify with actigraphy. And the takeaway is not that you shouldn't do low intensity activity, but that high intensity activity is very efficient and beneficial. But definitely don't think you can outwork 5 minutes of with 5 minutes of high activity intensity interval training, 20 hours of sedentary lifestyle. Yes. And then you ended, or you told us about masters athletes.
Yes, so these are athletes over 35 being very active, where generally good to exercise, but there are some risk factors to doing a lot of exercise for your heart. So be aware of this. There are some things like AFib where you could be in increased risk, and be aware of this also when talking to your doctor, that you can either inform them or hopefully you find a doctor that can actually inform you because they are already aware.
Exactly, they're doctors. Yeah, and with that, we wish you a great day. Go out, go exercise a lot, be careful, and be your best N of 1.
See you next time.
Bye.